What up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Let's Ask Paul, the podcast where you get to send me, Paul Abernathy, anything you want about the National Electrical Code. I will break it down, and if I answer in an email, you may get selected to be used on an upcoming podcast, much like today's podcast. So I'm going to thank everybody for joining me. Hopefully, you've all been joining me over on Coffee Hour every morning at 8 a.m., you can watch for free over on Fast Track's Tube. You'll see a link in the navigation that says Coffee Hour or live free shows, and that's where we also do our free webinars. But you can also follow Coffee Hour on all of our other platforms as well. We stream Coffee Hour live on our YouTube channel, which is at Master the NEC, occasionally over on our LinkedIn channels as well, and our Facebook platforms. So we stream on multiple avenues, and occasionally we even stream on Rumble when I'm not too lazy to set it up. So thanks for joining me and listening to our podcast. And if you join the show, it's awesome to have you at our show every morning because you can just bring up any topic you want that is kind of germane to what we're already talking about. If it's something that's going to be very in-depth, then I'm going to recommend you send it through paulabernathy.com so that we can make it for an upcoming episode or a podcast like today so I can get in-depth in answering your questions, things like that. So anyway, that's what we have. So again, thanks for joining me. Also, don't forget to get our free mobile app. It's free. It doesn't cost you anything. Just go to our website, which is fasttracksystem.com. It'll be down in the description. Just go over there and go to the navigation and you'll see mobile app. Just click on the link. If you're on your mobile phone, it'll ask you, yes, do you want to add it to your phone? Say yes. All it's doing is putting a link. That's it. A little icon and a link so you can click it. It is web-based, so we can update it without having to make you download something, invade your privacy, all this kind of other garbage that you get with the App Store. I know it's easy, but it's much easier rather than go to the App Store. Just go to our website and get it. Makes sense, right? And we don't want just anybody downloading it. We only want electricians that are going to use it, so that's why when you put something on an App Store, Apple Store or whatever, then anybody can download it. Not, you know what, we're not about the money for that. We're not charging for it, so we don't care that there's 30,000 people using an app. It don't mean nothing to us. We want electricians to use it. We want people that are in the electrical business to use it. So better to get it from us directly at our website than it is to go searching through that garbage. Anyway, enough of that. All right, today's episode, we're going to be answering a question that was submitted to the Let's Ask Paul. That's a great question. I've been getting this question for decades, okay? I've been getting it, not that I serve on Code Making Panel 5, but it's just the kind of question that we typically get all the time. And they're like, look, I need some clarity for this. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to bring some clarity. So what we're talking about is very specific. And we're going to be looking and talking about 250.64, but we're going to be looking at D1. And D1 is that common grounding electrode, conductor, and taps. So that is where you might have a CT, you come out of the CT into a wireway, you come out of the wireway, you drop down into two separate service panels right beside each other. And now you're like, okay, I know that I have to run from the services, I have to run a connection to, and I have multiple options, but I have to go from the grounded conductor, I have to connect to the grounding electrode. Now, whatever your grounding electrode may be, whether it's a UFR, whatever it may be, in-ground steel, whether it may be a chemical type of electrode, rods, pipe, plates, whatever your electrode, UFR, whatever it may be, you have to get that connection and make that connection, okay? And so there's this one aspect that seems to always get submitted to me that seems to be quite confusing for people. So we're going to clear it up today. And that is, hey, Paul, what is, and let me read you the question, kind of paraphrase out the question. It asks this question. It says, Paul, thanks for your podcast. I love listening to it, and I'm loving Coffee Hour in the mornings. Whoops, there you go. Let me give a shout out. He's watching our Coffee Hour, and he's listening to our podcast. Sweet. All right. He says, I understand that in the 2023 edition of the National, and he also gave code reference to the what cycle. Beautiful, dude, you're on it. He said, in the 2023 NEC, it says that common grounding electroconductor is to be sized based on the sum of the ungrounded conductors for one phase or set of the supplied conductors to the service disconnecting means. However, it does not stipulate anywhere in there of the type of electrode that's in question, whether it's a UFR or ground rods. My question is, does 250.66a apply and I not have to size my grounding electrode conductor any larger than a 6 if I have ground rods? Do I have to size the grounding electrode conductor based on the summation? I love how he uses these big words that I like to use. Summation of the ungrounded conductors at the CT or at the supply side of the service. Thanks in advance. I hope this is clear. I look forward to hearing your answer on the next podcast. Okay. Thank you very much for that question. Very detailed, very concise. So what he's asking, he says, okay, so for those out there that have your code book, if you go look at 250.64D 1, okay? Now, D, for example, says when you have buildings or structures with multiple disconnecting means in separate enclosures. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. So if I had to paint you this mental picture, I've got a CT, which is basically just, basically you have CTs, current transformers, that go over top of the conductors so it can actually read how much power you're using. Okay, big CT cabinet, it's not service equipment. It's put in there by the utility, or you may install it for the utility. But the conductors simply just pass through it. Okay, and then they're going to go into, let's say, a wireway. It's still service conductors, still on the supply side. Code allows us to bond all those metal parts to the grounded conductor, 250-142, so we're bonded, everything's good. But then it comes down into two separate service disconnects, okay? And it drops off of that. Okay, so it comes down and it hits your service disconnect. So now you're running your grounding electrode system for this building. Now, there are three different options here. One, obviously D1, we're going to be talking about. D2 is where you could run an individual grounding electrode conductor from each individual service enclosure straight to your electrode, whatever it may be. You can run it. That's called the individual one from each one. It's fine. Or you could do a common location. That is D3, which means you could make a connection over in the CT, right? Yeah, I know the HJs don't like that shit. Utilities don't like that sometimes, but again, that's the code says you can make that connection to the grounded conductor anywhere on the supply side up to and including in the service disconnect, but you can do it on the supply side, so it could be done in a CT, could be done in a meter, all those type of things. I know they don't like it, but it could be done. But anyway, common location would be taking your grounding electrode conductor out of a common location ahead of your service disconnect, like maybe out of that wireway connected to the grounded conductors or out of the CT or whatever. So you have options, okay? But we're focusing on today is the one that does the common grounding electrode conductor and the taps. So with this one, painting you a mental picture, you've got your CT. And if you're in your mind, you're like, I can't picture what a CT is. Just think of a big box that the conductors from utility come into. They run through these things that look like donuts, okay? And it measures the intensity of the power in order to be able to charge you money. It runs through those and then over to the wireway where then it splits off and you can actually tap onto it and do two separate service equipment. You get what I'm saying? Okay. That's all I want you to paint that mental picture. Now, from the service equipment, which is two or more side by side, the disconnecting means for the service, they're separate enclosures side by side. I need to get grounding electrodes. I need to have grounding electrode conductors for this enclosure. Now, I have those other options, but we're going to go with the one that does the common. And what's the common? Well, the common one is pretty simple. You take one conductor, properly sized, run it underneath of both of those service disconnects, and then continue it onto whatever your electrode may be. So your electrode may be a UFR. Your electrode may be a water pipe ground that is supplemented by some other electrode in 250, 52, A2 through A7 or whatnot. So it's one common conductor that's going underneath. It's not necessarily going up in any of the panels, which it could, but it's not. It's just running underneath, let's just say for simplicity's sake. And it goes to whatever your electrode is, whatever the electrode is, okay? And this is also good for exam prep, folks. So if you're out there thinking about exam prep and how people can ask you questions, this is important. Okay, what it says, let's read what it says in 250.64D1. Okay. It says common grounding electrode conductor and taps. It says a common grounding electrode conductor, and again, that's the one that we run underneath the other panels and run it straight to the electrode. Okay, that's common to both of the enclosures. It's going to be common to both the enclosures. So both enclosures are going to connect to it with a tap, if you will. So it's common. Shall be sized in accordance with 250.66. Now, it says 250.66. It doesn't say table 250.66. It just says in accordance with 250.66. And the reason for that is by making a reference to 250.66, it's also making it clear that it's not just table 250.66 that's applicable here, but also the 250.66A, B, and C, which many people call exceptions. They're not exceptions, okay? They're allowances. They're right there. They're permitted to be able to utilize it. This is the example of 250.66A is where it says that it doesn't have to be larger than a 6 copper or 4 aluminum to a rod, pipe, or plate. Okay. And if you're not familiar with that, just grab your code book, go over and look at 250.66, and then go past the table and look at A. It's connections to rod, pipe, or plate electrodes. And it gives you some provisions in there. And you'll notice you get to the last sentence and it'll say shall not be required to be larger than a 6 copper or 4 aluminum. Okay. And we're not going to talk about the other conductor that's listed there. Not going to reference it. Not going to give it any credence, if you will. I'm just not going to do it. It keeps me out of trouble. All right. So that's what we're dealing with. All right. Now, you'll notice that in the code, it does not say anything specific about the type of electrode. It doesn't get into that. Right. It's just talking about the common grounding electrode conductor and its associated taps. So this is why it says it this way. And people get confused with the verbiage. And I've had electrical inspectors get extremely confused with this verbiage. It says, again, I'm going to read it so the context of reading the whole thing. And then I'll stop again and we'll redo it again if we need to. But we need to, repetition is important for me. Redundancy is important. If you don't like that, then this is not the podcast for you, my friend. Because I do things redundantly over and over again to hammer things home. Okay. It says a common grounding electrode conductor. Hold on. I got my screen stalled up on me. It says a common grounding electrode conductor and grounding electrode conductor taps shall be installed. The common grounding electrode conductor shall be installed in accordance with 250.66 based on the sum of the circular mill area of the largest ungrounded conductors of each set of conductors that supplies the disconnecting means. Okay, so let me kind of paint you that mental picture now. So let's say that I have a CT. Again, just think of it as conductors passing through the CT. It's just a way of the utility for big services. You don't have this on residential, you just have a meter. And you put the meter in there, and that's how they read your consumption. Here, usually if you have a CT, it'll be just the CT. The conductors kind of basically pass through from point A to point B, and then the CT supplies a meter that's going to tell you how much they're going to charge you a month, okay? And if it's commercial, they look at things like power factors and all this other kind of stuff based on the equipment that they have connected to the CT. Make sense? So just for you and me, just a box passing through. So it's where the utility conductors will come in, and then they change over to be able to get to your service equipment. Okay. So in this case, let's say it's coming out of the top of the CT and it's a double lugged CT. So there's 2 lugs on the top. So it's basically coming out the top, and one conductor for, let's say, C phase. I'm just throwing numbers out there. C phase. It says 3 phase, let's say. C phase, one of the conductors out of the double lug feeds one panel, and then the other lug feeds a second panel side by side. So basically, it's 2 conductors coming out of phase C, okay, or leg C. It wouldn't matter whether it's just 12240 and you have leg A and B, black and red, let's say. Again, colors aren't required, but just I'm trying to paint you this mental thing. It's the conductors that are coming out of the other side of the CT that is going to be supplying 2 separate service enclosures, okay, and disconnecting means. You with me? Okay. So now, when it says the summation, basically on C, you've got two conductors coming out of the lug. And they're probably going to be the same size, 3/0, let's say. Okay. Well, or let's make it easy. For a 250 kc mil. Let's make it easy. So 250 kc mil, one 250 is feeding one enclosure and the other 250 is feeding the other enclosure. Perfectly fine, right? There's no overcurrent protection ahead of all this. This is a CT. This is utility supplying it. So it's still service conductors coming in. So you have two separate panels. So one panel is being fed by a 250. The other panel is being fed by 250, but the summation, as it said, of the conductors that are coming out of the CT would be 500 kc mil, two 500s, because that is the set. Let's say we're just doing the C phase. Okay, you with me? Okay, keep it simple. So it's coming out of the CT, hitting a wireway that's connected to it, and then dropping down with raceways, maybe nipples. We call them nipples. I hate the term nipple, but anyway, it's a raceway coming down into each set of service enclosure. Oh, by the way, the image that I'm painting in your mind, you will be able to watch this on the coffee hour on January 17th edition in 2025. The January 17th coffee hour, we will be going over this. So for this gentleman, I'm also, adding this to my explanation for coffee hour. So again, if any of this explanation confuses you, do you a favor, go look for coffee hour. It talks about the grounding electrode conductors, and go specifically look for the one that's from January 17th. Okay, just so you know. All right, so in this scenario, you take the summation because that's what the code said, right? Code said. It says based on the sum of the circular mill area of the largest ungrounded conductors, plural, of each set. So I'm just taking one set. I'm saying the C. That's it. Phase C, one set. Whether it's parallel and you have two, whether it's parallel and you have three sets, I'm just taking C. That's it. And I'm going to add that summation. So in our case, we had 500,000 circular mills, or we had 250 running to each individual service. But collectively, the sum of those ungrounded conductors that are supplying the disconnecting means, the sum is what? 500 kc mil. You with me? Okay. Now, it says if the service entrance conductors connect directly to an overhead service conductor, service drop, or underground service conductors, or service lateral, like not through the CT, like they go up on a weatherhead and you have a bunch of risers that come up and they connect up there, then basically it says the common grounding electroconductors shall be sized in accordance with table 250.66 note 1. And all that note says is if there's multiple sets that are coming, basically it's the equivalent area of the largest service entrance conductor shall be determined by the summation of the area of the corresponding conductors of each set. Okay, so again, if you had 6 sets, then you just take all of phase C, okay, and add up all those. So if I had a parallel 4 sets, then I would just, of 250, then it'd be 1 million circular mills because I just take the 4 from C phase. That's it, just one set. That's it, right? And use that. And then I go to 250.66, the table, and work it from there. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. So I just wanted to paint that mental picture. So that's what you do. And that's what you're going to do, guys, if you're connecting on the supply side, if you're going to be using the many options that you have, okay? If you're going to be using D2, for example, then you're just going individually out to each electrode. And that's probably going to be dictated by whatever you're running to the electrode, okay? For example, ground rod's a 6, UFR a 4, that type of thing. But if you were using one of the other electrodes, okay, then you'd have a summation issue. But D2 is specifically talking about individual grounding electroconductors, okay? And again, we're going to talk about that on coffee hour. It's not going to be the question today, but we'll be talking about it on coffee hour tomorrow. Don't worry. And then the common location would be like making the connection up into the panel, right? Up into the wireway or making a panel up into the CT or somewhere on the supply side. A common location Okay, it's like in a wireway or other accessible enclosure on the supply side, that's exactly what it says, then you're going to have to use the summation like we just talked about, okay? All right, but there are other things that we do want to point out because there are allowances, okay? There are allowances for rod piper plates. There are allowances for UFers and that type of thing, so, and rings. So relax. And we're going to cover those things on another episode. Right now, we're just going to be covering D1. All right, now, that is how you size that. So if we were going to, let's just say it was a water pipe ground, right? And we were going to do this common. So this is one conductor that's running underneath the two service disconnects, and it's going to connect to the water pipe ground. Let's say 5 feet of point of entry. Let's just keep it consistent, right? That conductor is going to be based on the summation of the conductors that are ahead of the service disconnects, okay? Which is that 500 we got. Even though each individual one was fed by 250, but they come from the same lug, it's a double lug, so summation would be 500 kc mil, okay? And that's how we'd size that common. Now, the question that people ask is say, well, okay, I get that, Paul, and it doesn't tell me the type of electrode that we're using. And for an exam, it may not. And that's what you got to remember. If it does not, then you're going to do just like we did the summation, and you're going to go to the table once you get your summation. But what if they tell you it's a ground rod? What if they tell you it's a pipe? Or what if they tell you it's a plate? Well, that's why it made reference to 250.66, because not just the table, because it means you get to use all of 250.66. And because of that, in the first charging statement of 250.66, this is what it says. It says, the size of the grounding electroconductor and bonding jumpers, again, that's from electrode to electrode, for example, for connecting the grounding electrodes shall not be smaller than given in table 250.66, except as permitted in 250.66A through D. So that's what so many people get lost at this. Why does it reference 250.66 and 250.64 D1? And the reason for that is it wants you to be able to use all of 250.66. And this is where I bring that old saying. You can't put 10 pounds of crap in a 5-pound bag. So if you go look at 250.66A, it says that if the grounding electroconductor or bonding jumper connected to a single or multiple rods, pipe, or plates, or any combination thereof, are as described in 250.52A5 or A7, okay, that's describing the different types of electrodes, by the way, does not extend onto other types of electrodes that require a larger conductor. That means you can't go from a ground rod and then continue up to a UFer to complete your connection. If you were supplementing, then that would be requiring a larger conductor. So you have to be stopping, okay? You have to be ending at the rod, pipe, or plates to be able to use this, okay? Can't extend on to other electrodes that would require that grounding electroconductor to be actually larger. You can't do that. So with that said, it says the grounding electroconductor shall not be required to be larger than a 6 copper or 4 aluminum, or that other conductor we won't talk about. Okay, so we learned in coffee hour on the 16th of January that we probably are not going to use aluminum, because if we're going to a rod, pipe, or plate, probably it's going to be within 18 inches of the earth outside. And of course, we have some rules that we have to follow that we can't do, right? And we're like, okay, well, I can't follow those rules because those are problems with 250.64, and I don't want to get into that 210.64A. I don't want to get into that with aluminum or that other conductor that is not copper or aluminum. Well, it's more aluminum than it is copper, but that's for a different episode that I won't be doing because I don't want people's feelings to get hurt. So anyway, so that's what we've got, okay? So that's why it references 250.66, because I can use 250.66A, B, or C where applicable. So to answer his question, if I have a 5,000 amp service and I have the conductors coming out of the CT, it could be 2 million circular mills feeding 2 large service disconnects. If I run ground rods, which I can, and I put 2 ground rods 6 feet apart for this service, I can use the same 2 for all of these service disconnects, by the way. If they're grouped in location, they meet the requirements of 230.70A1. They're all grouped in A2 and all that stuff in 230.71 and 72. If I meet all those rules and I put 2 ground rods in, I can bring all of those. I'm just running that common one all the way underneath all of them. Not more than 6 service disconnects grouped in one location. I'm going to run it underneath, and I'm going to take it to my ground rods. And I'm going to run a 6 gauge. I'm done because of the allowance, the permissive allowance in 250.66A. It doesn't matter what size those service conductors are. It doesn't matter about the summation math that people start blowing their mind in 250.64D. 1. If I'm using ground rods, doesn't have to be larger than a 6. Again, you can't put 10 pounds of crap in a 5-pound bag. It is what it is, and it's acceptable. You may not like it. You may not feel right about it. It's the same guy that doesn't feel right about putting a 40 amp overcurrent device on a 14 gauge because the code says you can for HVAC or a motor application. It doesn't feel right, but the code is what it is. Okay? Same thing for a UFER. If I'm going to run a common underneath these panels and I'm going to run it to a UFER, what does it say? 250.66B. Says the same concept. If you're not extending this grounding electroconductor onto another electrode that would be required to have a larger grounding electrode, like continuing on to a water pipe, which is not listed here, then it doesn't have to be larger than a 4 copper. Notice it doesn't give those other types of grounding electroconductor material. It only gives 1, and that is a 4 gauge, okay? It's not required to be larger than a 4 gauge copper. Now, let me answer one question that people bring up. Could it be smaller than these? Absolutely, it could be. You're not forced to use A, B, or C. You could use table 250.66 if the size of the conductors in 250.64D1, or if it dictates that you have a situation where your conductors are smaller. For example, if you look at table 250.66, notice it says copper 2 or smaller. Then notice that it says the size of the grounding electroconductor is an 8 gauge. So even if it was rods, you're not required to be larger than a 6, but could you be smaller than a 6? Absolutely you could be. You could be an 8. Now, as we talked about on Coffee Hour, you got to be careful because once it becomes an 8, for example, it doesn't matter whether it's subject to physical damage or not. Now you have to protect it in a raceway. And in my advice on that episode was to use Schedule 80 PVC because you don't want to use any metallic raceway that may be a ferrous metal. Then you got all those problems that you're going to have to deal with bonding, right? And at each end of that. And that's something that we'll get into at some point in 250.64E, where we have to worry about ferrous metals and things like that. You don't have to worry about that in Schedule 80 PVC, baby. So just get her done and move on. That type of scenario. You get me? Don't make things work smarter, not harder. I'm just saying. All right, so now we know that, for example, we could use a common, which goes underneath both of the all of our service disconnects and goes to our electrode. If it's a rod, pipe, or plate, it does not have to be larger than a 6 copper for aluminum. But again, you got those issues about terminating within 18 inches of the earth, so be careful with that one. Okay, typically it's going to be copper. Then you don't have to worry. So we got that. Let's see here. If it is a UFER, then it doesn't have to be larger than a 4 running underneath all those services going down to the UFER. You don't have to supplement a UFER. Okay, so we're good. You have to supplement a ground rod unless you can prove it's 25 ohms or less. So that's why you have 2. So that extra ground rod is basically supplementing the first ground rod, and together they act as 1. So you heard me tell you that the grounding electroconductor goes to the first rod. The other one is the requirement by the code if you can't prove 25 ohms or less. So basically it's supplementing the first one, and they act as 1. So that's why it's unbroken to the first one, except for some allowances for CAD welding or irreversible crimp. Other than that, it's continuous. But when you go to the second electrode, that's just a bonding jumper. So you put two separate connectors on your ground rod and you go to it. Now, if you want to save a connector, an acorn, then you just make it unbroken. You loop through the one and you go to the other one rod 6 feet away. And you just save yourself a connector. But that's not required. Okay. All right. So I'm all over the place. I'm an ADD kind of guy. So that common grounding electrode conductor that's running underneath your panels over to your electrode, done. We showed you how to size it. If it's like a water pipe ground, which then you have to use a summation of the size of the sets of your service conductors on the supply side of your service disconnect. We showed you that. And if that confuses you, join me on the 17th of January. I'll explain it, show you an illustration. But then we also explained that, well, if it is one of the ones that are listed rod, pipe, or plate, a UFOR or ring, then you have allowance in 250.66 A, B, or C. If it's any of the other electrodes other than the ones that are in 250.66 A, B, or C, then you go right to the table and you're going to base it on the summation. Okay? Now, with all that said, let's skip on to the part that's the tap part, because that's the part that people, okay, so now I've got my services there. I've got my disconnects there, separate enclosures. Not more than 6, all grouped, all happy. I need to connect from those enclosures down to the common grounding electrode conductor. Okay, so here's what the code says under 250.64D1, and we're going to the second paragraph. It says, a grounding electrode conductor tap, and again, that is not the common, that's going from the enclosure to connect onto the common. It says, shall extend to the inside of each disconnecting enclosure. So it needs to go from the common and come up into the disconnecting means enclosure. Okay, so notice it says it shall extend to each, inside each disconnecting means enclosure, each, okay? It says the grounding electrode conductor tap shall be sized in accordance with 250.66 for the largest service entrance or feeder conductor serving the individual enclosures. So now you're not basing this on the total summation like it's all of the conductors that are coming out of your CT into the wireway. You're only sizing what is supplying the service disconnect of each individual enclosure individually, okay? And so that conductor that's going to be going from that service disconnect, the grounded terminal bus, down to the common conductor that you ran underneath it, that is sized based on the conductors that are supplying the service disconnect for that separate individual enclosure, okay? And it says 250.66 again rather than a table. Why do you think it does that? Because if you've got a common grounding electrode conductor that's only 6 gauge due to going to ground rods, then there's no reason for that tap to be any larger than that, right? But could it be potentially smaller than the 6? Absolutely it could be, because I do have the option to use the table. You get me? That's why they write it that way. That's why they didn't specifically just send you to the table, okay? All right. Okay, so anyway, so it says in accordance with 250.66 for the largest service entrance or feeder conductor that is serving that individual enclosure. Okay, it says the tap conductor shall be connected to the common grounding electrode conductor by one of the following means, not all of them, one of the following means, in such a manner that the common grounding electrode conductor remains without a splice. Okay, so we just start that common one underneath the panels. It just starts out of nowhere. It just starts and runs underneath them and then continues on to the electrode. So by making the connection, that tap from the enclosure, service enclosure, each individual one, down to it, I have to do it so that it doesn't splice that common. It can't splice it or break it in any way. That was continuous. It has to make a connection to it. Now, how can we make that connection so that it doesn't mess with the integrity of that common grounding electrode conductor? Well, it says we can exothermic weld it if we want. So we can position it up and do that. I'm probably not going to do that, but you can. Next, it says, well, you can use connectors listed as grounding and bonding for grounding and bonding equipment. Well, that's an example of terminations in 250.8. We get a nice little list of different acceptable methods. okay? But I'm going to tell you the one that people mostly use here, because remember, the tap doesn't have to be unspliced. Yeah, obviously, it's coming from the enclosure and splicing onto the unbroken common grounding electrode, right? So most of the people would just use a split bolt. A split bolt listed for grounding and bonding applications, stamped as such. It's listed. It's got its mark on it. It's good to go. They just use split bolts. So yes, they can be split bolt. The taps can be split bolt to the common grounding electrode conductor. And you're not breaking the common grounding electrode conductor. You're not breaking it, okay? The third method for doing this is where it's connections to an aluminum or copper bus bar, not less than 1/4 of an inch thick and 2 inches wide. And of course, the length of it has to be long enough to accommodate all the connections that you may be making to it, okay? So that goes without saying. If you have other connections, you need to make sure you have a number of terminations that is actually necessary to make those connections, okay? So again, the length of it's dependent on your number of connections, but the width of it is dictated 2 inches wide, and the thickness of this aluminum bar or copper bus bar is 1/4 of an inch thick, which is probably standard for any of those bus bars that you would buy for this type of application. They're very common to use in data centers on the wall when you're creating this grid, or they're used outside. Very common to buy these bus bars that have their own little feet that you mount and it kind of raises and elevates it off the wall, that type of thing. Very common. And it tells you that that bus bar shall be securely fastened and shall be installed in an accessible location. Ain't no hiding that bus bar, folks. Accessible. It says connections shall be made to that bus bar from your grounding electrode conductor. It shall be made by a listed connector or by exothermic welding process. It says if aluminum bus bar are used, the installation shall comply with 250.64a, and that's just a reminder that not to make it so that it is within 18 inches of the earth. That's all it's making a reference to. I love how the code does that. Some people hate it, but I love how it does it, okay? Just makes everything clean and clear, okay? So just kind of one of those things. Now, if you have Link and you're a member in FPA and you subscribe to Link, it's like $120 a year to get so much information. They have a really nice enhanced content illustration. It's really nice. And it basically shows a picture of it and the connections and how it does and all that kind of thing. So I encourage you, if you have it, go look at it. It is underneath D1, and it kind of shows an example of what I've pretty much painted you a mental picture of. And of course, we'll look at it as well when we come to the coffee hour. Now, I will remind you, the one that's shown in the picture does not dictate the type of electrode, and that's important because if it doesn't dictate the type of electrode, then you're going to be going to where? You're going to be going to the tables. You're not going to be going to like 250.66a for rod piper plate because they did not tell you the type of electrode. That's so important, guys, for taking exams. If they don't tell you the type of electrode, you're going to default, okay, at the table based on the summation of conductors, okay? You're not going to be using A, B, or C in 66 because it doesn't make a reference to the type of electrode. So you shouldn't assume the type of electrode. So that's why you end up at the table, okay? All right. Well, I think that's great. I think that's a lot of information. We're going to go over some great illustrations on our coffee hour. And it's going to be, again, Friday the 17th. So we'll be going over it. And it'll be easier to understand, I promise you. Sometimes illustrations make it just worth it. And so we'll be showing you that connection on how it's done. But basically what it means is you're coming out, all of these service disconnects, you're coming down, you're hitting a bus, and then all of them come together on one little bus. Or I shouldn't say little, one bus. And then from there, the common goes over to the electrode, okay? So that type of thing. But we'll show you that. And again, explain that in extreme detail. But hopefully that answers the gentleman's question that submitted to me. You most certainly can use 250.66 A, B, and C. The permission to do that was right up at the beginning of 250.66. Anytime it references like 250.64 D1, anytime it references 250.66, then you get to use all of 250.66, depending on what your condition is. And your condition was rods. And so most certainly, again, you can't put 10 pounds of crap in a 5-pound bag. So, and this is also keeps you from oversizing conductors that are unnecessary. We have significant data over the years that say, you know what? Ground rods are fine. Do this, they're fine. Then you're okay. Okay? Don't have to freak out. All right? All right, folks, that's it. I just wanted to make sure that I covered the good stuff and answered this question. But again, I encourage you to join me, folks. Everybody out there that's listening to our podcast, no matter when you listen, if you made it this far in the podcast, we're 40 minutes in, make sure you join me Monday through Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern Time over on Fast Tracks Tube. We have a free link at the top. All you got to go to it, and at the link at the top, it'll say live shows and free webinars. Just click on it. That's where we have Coffee Hours live stream, but you can also watch on our YouTube channel, which is at Master the NEC, our Facebook channels, which are also at Master the NEC, and you can follow at... that's pretty much those, and obviously you can follow us on our Fast Tracks Tube, that type of thing. All right, and over on LinkedIn as well, it's just my name, Paul Abernathy. You'll know it when you see it, or you can follow our company, Electrical Code Academy Inc., and it streams over there as well. Whatever you want. All right, folks. Till next time, folks. Stay safe. God bless, and we'll catch you on an upcoming episode of Let's Ask Paul. Peace.